Hello, thank you for tuning in to Nobodies Podcast. How you doing, Jen?
I'm doing well. How are you?
We have entered a new era of time and possibilities and potentials. We've entered into 2022.
Yep.
How do you feel?
The 2022 portal. Actually really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, this year's off to a good start.
Yeah, off to a good start. A lot of changes happening, of course, for both of us. And 2021 was a phenomenal year filled with lots of different types of changes, growth, spiritual growth. Obviously, we were doing the podcast during that time. We learned a lot. And we wanted to spend some time today with you guys. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for tuning in. And meeting you guys here on the other end of the portal that we just entered into 2022. How was your New Year's, by the way?
It was really fun. I actually had a really great New Year's.
Really? What did you do?
Yeah, so a friend of ours is a big time gambler, and he's mega rich. So he, I guess the hotels, they invite their whales. They're like whale gamblers to big parties. So he couldn't go this year because he had COVID. So he gave us his tickets, and we went, and it was like a magical wonderland. I mean, everybody was dressed up in costumes like mystical creatures, and the room was decorated like just beautifully. And at the end of dinner, they so it was like a 7-course dinner, and you sit down and eat with a bunch of strangers, but they have performers on the whole time and Cirque du Soleil people. And then Bruno Mars came out and did the countdown.
Bruno Mars
sang a couple songs.
What?
Yeah, yeah, it was really cool.
I didn't know whales like to party like that.
Yeah, they like to party. So, and apparently I like to party too, because of course everything, is free. So I really took advantage of that. So I had one of every single cocktail that they offered.
And go out with a bang.
Had the worst. Oh, yes. It ruined my Saturday, I'll tell you that. Like I had the worst hangover I think I've ever had. I was having wine and margaritas and martinis and, shit that just really does not go together.
Celebrating life.
Yeah. But the best part was the end of the night, they brought us dessert. And the dessert was a giant crystal ball made of sugar. But it was like clear. You could see through it. And it said the hotel we were at was Aria. So it had like Aria on the inside. And there was a giant dragon claw on top that was also made of sugar. And then it was like on a bed of moss. And it had dragon eggs filled with custards around this like crystal ball. It was amazing.
What is this witchcraft, Jen?
Oh my God. It was so good. And these little chocolate dragon eggs, like full of different custards. Oh, it was lovely.
Did you take any pictures? That looks cool.
I did. Yeah. I'll send you some.
Oh,
yeah, it was really great.
One and only time in your life where you actually get to consume witchcraft.
Right. Yeah.
Did you feel like a wizard afterwards?
I felt like really out of place.
Really?
I felt like everybody knew that we didn't belong there, but because we were just
whoa. Can you define what exactly is a whale? Because when you tell me whale, I just think of like the whales that they have out in the ocean.
Whales are men or women that have more money than sense and are willing to freely gamble it away.
I see.
Yeah. So the casinos call them whales, like, because they know as soon as they come in, they're just going to be like spouting money.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So they're just sort of like these larger than life characters that have a bunch of money to spend, and maybe throughout the year they don't have a whole lot of people to spend it with, so they just throw a huge party so everybody gets together.
Kind of. It's more like an appreciation for these whales, because casinos. No, the casinos are big and beautiful and decorated like beautifully with the best of everything. And it's not because people are winning, right? Yeah. So the casino odds are always in the casino's favor.
Yeah.
So I think it's more of an appreciation. These whales come in and spend a bunch of money and probably don't win nearly as much as they lose. Yeah. So at the end of the year, it's just like to keep them coming back, right?
That's
like all
cool.
the special perks. Mm-hmm.
Nice. That was a nice time to celebrate. Mine was very, very different from yours. I ended up catching, and I want to know what your thoughts are on this, Jen, because I feel like I caught the COVID. I feel like I caught the Rona. Okay, long story short, I ended up spending New Year's at home because I was sick. right? Got sick directly after Christmas. I don't know exactly how I got it because I was one of those people that was playing it safe the entire time, had my N95, masked up twice, and I still managed to get it. So right when I ended up getting sick, I ended up taking a collection of about 2 PCR tests, 3 rapid tests. All of them came back negative, but I just don't remember colds feeling the way it felt during that time. It was the onset of symptoms that were entirely different. That's the only reason why I feel like it may have been, if anything, Omicron. And you know what they say about Omicron is it's maybe one of those things that are a little bit more difficult to catch on a rapid test or a PCR test. And it was just the onset of symptoms that was very unique and interesting. I don't remember colds feeling that way. So I was dealing with being sick for pretty much a couple weeks. And for anybody that's listening, just of course wanted to apologize. We've been out of the game with the podcast, one, because of the holidays. Wanted some time to take a break and spend time with family, which I think a lot of other podcasts are doing that, did that as well. But at the same time, I ended up getting sick. And I wasn't of no use. I wasn't able to get behind a microphone. I was coughing. Jen will tell you, I was not feeling very well. So I appreciate your guys' patience during that process. We're back up and running. We're going to get this machine going for 2022. And we have a lot of amazing things in store. But yeah, I ended up getting sick. I ended up staying at home. So I spent New Year's at home, which ended up actually being really fun. I was with my partner. And during that time, on the actual day of New Year's, we ended up feeling pretty good. So we ended up having enough energy to go and take a walk outside down Colorado Boulevard, where, you know, because we're in Pasadena, they have the Rose Parade that happens every year. And if you're not familiar with the Rose Parade, a lot of people come from out of town to camp out overnight in order to see the Rose Parade on New Year's Day. And walked out there. And it was a really, really surreal experience, Jen, because I've lived in Pasadena for over a decade, and this was the first and only time I've actually seen Colorado Boulevard pretty empty. There weren't a whole lot of people out there camping, you know?
Wow.
Yeah, so it was almost like you get the sense that things are different, things are changing. Had this like post-apocalyptic vibe where it's like what once was there is not there anymore. And the people that were there camping out with their families just sort of had this look on their face of like, wow, this is not at all the same as it used to be. Although it was kind of like an enjoyable experience. We still walked out there. And then during New Year's, we just, you know, kissed in front of a Target.
Aw, that's cute.
Because it just happened to be on the street that we were walking down. But yeah, we just took like a nice stroll. Ended up spending time at home because we weren't feeling very well. But, you know, we made the best of that experience. And it was fun.
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah. It's just like when you get sick, you want to take that as an opportunity to kind of be with yourself, take care of yourself. And because it was New Year's, we also had time to reflect on life. And this is going to be the subject that we wanted to cover today, because me and Jen are both very introspective people that have also been going through a lot of changes in our lives, especially in 2021. So we wanted to dedicate this episode to lessons that we had learned from 2021 as just as individuals, but also as a podcast as well, and just sort of make way for 2022, the year that we're in, see what else we can learn along this process together. But I think getting into reflection, I think would be fun.
Yeah, I think so too. When I was making this list, it was very, very easy for me. I felt like I didn't even need to put a lot of thought into it.
Yeah.
It was almost like when you're channeling a message and stuff just starts flowing in so fast that I wasn't able to type fast enough to keep up with it. I probably could have done 20 lessons that I learned rather than 10.
Yeah.
I don't know if you had the same experience, but
I had a difficult time trying to consolidate the list, you know.
Me too.
Because within every lesson is another lesson, and it just becomes this fractal thing where it's just lessons on top of lessons, and because I'm a very, very introspective person, so I had a hard time trying to my list is already fucking huge just to begin with, but yeah, there are a lot of things that I learned in 2021, and even as we go throughout this podcast, we probably aren't going to get to all of them, but we're going to go over the ones that I feel like are important to cover. So let's go in order here, Jen. Why don't you go first? Something that you learned in 2021.
All right. So, and this is not in order. I mean, this is just how they were kind of coming to me. Not the most important, but I still think important. I think 2021 brought to light a lot of the things that we do with our body and how unhealthy people really are. And it really shined a light on how unhealthy I was as well. I didn't really exercise as much as I needed to. I didn't really eat nutritious and healthy foods. A lot of just like garbage, not eating regularly, drinking too much alcohol, just like kind of overindulging in all the things in 2020 and 2021 because I was locked in my house, right? Mm-hmm. So you find comfort in, alcohol and food. So, so that was my number one, was to be more health conscious and more conscious of what I am putting in my body.
Yeah, that's a good one. I think that's true because like, I think the pandemic kind of pulled the floor from underneath pretty much everybody. We had to learn an entirely new way of living, although we've been doing this for the last couple of years, but this is a process. Even to think like we've been doing this pandemic thing for 2 years, that's not really a long time. It's going to take our world quite a bit of time to adjust to this change as we're continuing to adjust to it. 2 years isn't really a whole lot of time. So I think what you're talking about plays out is, once everything changed and everybody had to spend more time at home, it's like all those things that you become unconscious of throughout your life, just on your day-to-day, become a lot more noticeable to you because you're not, substituting your experience with something that happens outside. You're spending a lot more time at home. And I feel like those bad habits are something that become a little bit more apparent as time goes by. And I noticed for me, it was the same thing. It's so easy to fall into some type of depression because of what's going on. That can lead to unhealthy eating patterns or not treating yourself very good. Mm-hmm. So I would say that would probably be something that I learned as well, which is like you had to learn how to move with the punches and not give in to despair, especially because there's a whole lot going on, and treating yourself good, eating healthy.
Yeah. Find a little balance. I was just like tipping the scale way too far on the indulgence side, rather than, being conscious about that. So I set up a full gym in my house. I have my Pilates machine and treadmill and bike and weight bench and all of that. So
what
it's been good. I've been
like
waking up early and exercising.
It's almost like, maybe people treated it like this. You know how like when you go on a road trip and you're with your friends or you're with your partner and you have a destination in mind. Maybe for example, I would be going from here to Vegas to go and see you. And that's going to be a temporary period of time. But on the way there, when you're in your car, you're listening to an amazing soundtrack, but you're going and you're snacking on all of these really delicious, but are really, really bad for you gas station snacks and food items.
Mm-hmm. Oh, the gas station, the combos. Yeah.
The combos. Oh, yeah. Oh my God, those are nasty.
Oh, the good stuff. The combos, the sour worms.
Combos sound better than they actually taste in my mind. They've always been one of those things where it's like, oh, combos, let me get those. And I get the combos and then they're fucking disgusting after like 5 minutes.
Oh, the pizza ones?
Yeah.
Oh, so gnarly. Yeah. And then the ranch flavored corn nuts.
Yeah.
And you don't eat meat, but I like beef jerky. You get that too. Sour worms.
Yeah. So what I mean
gas station garbage
is I think maybe we thought that the pandemic was almost going to be like a road trip. It's like, okay, we get to stay home and party and let's just eat some snacks. It's going to end eventually, right? Mm-hmm. Once you get to your destination, and we finally got to our destination, we realized, oh my God, we're still in the pandemic. We can't continue eating road snacks.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't just an event anymore. This is a lifestyle. So, I think everybody kind of what you considered the COVID, what was it? The COVID 10 pounds or something?
No, the COVID-19.
The COVID-19. The COVID-19 pounds. There you go. Yeah. I remember when you brought that up. It's like, I think everybody was on that same boat. I think everybody's sort of like, we're trying to find some way to assuage the pain through things like food, But I think at some point we realized, okay, this is going to be going on for a while. We need to like learn to integrate and treat ourselves a little better. So that's a good one.
Yeah. I kind of started actually at the end of 2021 because I knew that I wanted to be able to fit into a New Year's dress and, not feel uncomfortable. When you put on a little weight, it just feels like a little harder to breathe and, you get winded so much faster. And I don't know, I'm a small person, so even 10 pounds makes a big difference on me.
Yeah. Well, that's good. So so the one that I have, and we'll just go ahead and take turns here, Jen, which was accepting change and surrendering to life. This is a really big one because all of us are in this boat just in different ways, accepting change, obviously, because change is happening right now. A lot of these things involved me accepting my age and the sort of social changes that come along with getting older. You know, I'm not talking like I'm like super old, but I'm not. I'm still in my 30s. But observing everybody around me changing in my family, in my friendships, is something really, really surreal to experience, because I'm at that age where people are starting families, having children, and moving on with their lives. And, you know, friend groups that I'm still very, very close with are finding their way as sort of like an independent unit with their families. And being able to experience that is really beautiful, but it's also very surreal, because, you know, we think that certain moments that we have will last forever with, you know, groups of people that we spent all of our time with. And then, you know, life starts to change and people get older and their responsibilities and their goals in life start to change. And it's a really beautiful thing, but that also involves letting go of how you remember those relationships. And that can be a really beautiful, bittersweet type of experience. And I think how that applies to me is that same thing goes for myself, which is, you know, finding a different trajectory in my life and accepting the fact that it is natural for a human being to change and explore new things.
Absolutely. Sorry, I laughed in the middle of what you were saying. I just got like a vision in my head of one of my girlfriends that was just wild as hell, like probably one of the wildest people that I knew.
Yeah.
I mean, if there was an opportunity for her to flash her tits or chug a beer or, you know, whatever, I mean, she was the first one doing that. We lived together for a couple of years as well, and she would drink, you know, vodka waters for breakfast before work. I mean, she was just wild. And now she's a mom and she's a completely different person. It's like, I think about her then and, you know, see her now as a mother and, you know, really grounded and really, you know, taking, how do I say this? Really enjoying the experience of motherhood and being a good example, setting a good example. Yeah. And believe me, she never set a good example for a fucking soul in her life before. So it's, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like, and I go back to this sort of idea in my mind all the time, which is this idea that reincarnation exists in life while we're still breathing. It isn't just something that we experience at death. I feel like I've lived hundreds of different lifetimes in the life that I'm currently in. You know, when I think back of who I was 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 10 years ago, I look at myself as an entirely different person. There's parts of me that can identify with who I used to be. There's parts of me that can. But it's interesting how we change and we think that we're always going to be the same person. But there's a beauty to that whole process of change that I think we don't really give enough credit to, which is that change needs to happen in order for us to learn from certain experiences. You know, we can't always stay the same. And so what ends up happening is we end up living so many alternate different lives and dying within the same period of time and then being reborn somebody entirely different. And I know that when I think about those experiences, there was always things to learn, and I give gratitude to those experiences because without those, I wouldn't be who I am today. But I think this year, or this last year specifically, a lot more change than I had gone through in the past. I had seen people around me passing, people have passed away, you know. I've seen COVID sort of reshape the way that we connect and we adapt with other people. You know, I've let go of people I thought would always be there, but aren't there anymore, you know, and I'm just acknowledging that for growth to happen, change must happen, both spiritual and physical, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So accepting change and surrendering to life and just accepting that life is about change and surrender and being open to all of the changes that happen. And if you're able to be open to it, you can look back and show just tremendous amounts of gratitude for everything that you've ever experienced, because you will have acknowledged and understood that change must happen. You're not always holding on and always wanting to be exactly the same. Nobody would want to be the same forever. So it's interesting that we have people in life that are so, that approach the idea of change in such a negative way, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And they even use those words like, oh, you've changed.
Yeah.
And it's like, of
Like an-
course, everyone should change.
Yeah. Like as if it's like a negative thing,
Right.
you
Yeah.
know? And of course, as you change, the associations that you have with other people change. And that may involve letting people go that you no longer resonate with. And there's nothing wrong with that, you know?
Yeah. I remember a friend I had in college, and I finished college before she did, and, kind of started growing up, and, had a full-time job and bought a house and, was doing all the things. And I wasn't like her party buddy anymore. I wasn't available to just drop everything and, go out on a Tuesday night, And I remember her saying that to me. She was like, "Oh, you've changed, and everyone notices it." And I'm like, "Why?" Because I'm like growing up, because I'm more responsible. I just couldn't quite wrap my head around it. But I remember feeling so defensive,
Yeah.
But change isn't something you need to feel defensive about.
Yeah.
I mean, everyone changes,
Yeah.
as long as you're changing for the better, right? And you know if you're changing in the right direction or not,
Yeah.
if you're really being honest with yourself.
Yeah. And it's so much easier to accept change when we don't identify so strongly to the people that we used to be or the past. I noticed maybe that person that you're talking about, I obviously see that as a projection. She's upset because you are not fitting within the box that she saw you in. And so that is a hurt that hurts to her, so she's not at all considering how, what sort of trajectory that you happen to be on. And I think this is the sort of compassion that needs to take place when it comes to addressing other people, which is accepting, the needs and wants of other people. If they end up changing and they end up being somebody different, then you should respect that and honor that, because that's life,
Absolutely.
Yeah. So that was
All right.
accepting change and surrendering to real life. What else you got, Jen?
Yeah, that's a good one. So my next one is learning how to slow down and enjoy my time alone. I've always really enjoyed my time alone, but the slowing down part is really something I struggled with in the beginning. My life before 2020 was every single weekend. I had things planned from Thursday to Sunday nonstop, multiple trips on the books for, months in advance, and birthday parties and, social gatherings and this and that. I mean, it was just nonstop, right? And then 2020 hit and everything stopped. And then my social calendar, was wiped clean, and I was forced to just be by myself, and not have that, that feeling of, I don't want to say like being in the rat race, but that's kind of what it felt like, like running on the hamster wheel, like not really getting anywhere, doing a lot of things, but not really going anywhere, if that makes sense. But so it was a nice time over the last couple of years to take a break, and, moved away from California and moved, to another city where I don't have any friends here and I don't really know anyone. So that really kind of helped extend 2020 into 2021 and extend that slowdown. And it's been a really good thing for me. I really, really needed the break. Yeah. And things are a lot more clear.
It's such a huge contrast, because I was there with you during those times, and I knew you, I've known you for a long time, and I'd always known you back then to be a very business-oriented type of woman. You're a very, very career-driven type of woman. I mean, you've owned businesses. You were always traveling for work, and it seemed like something that was occupying a lot of your time. And you had a very, very active sort of social circle in Orange County, and that's cool. And that was just sort of the vibe that you were on. But I did notice that when you came to Nevada, and then obviously you switched careers, all of that entirely changed the way that you sort of like navigate through your life. And seeing those changes has been like a really surreal and beautiful thing, because it's so completely opposite from what I remember you being. And this is a perfect example of accepting change, because you are diametrically opposite to that life that you were in Orange County.
Oh, yeah. I went from never being home to being home all the time. Like, I'm at home more than I'm away from home, unless it's for work, right? Yeah. So, which kind of led me into my New Year's resolution. It kind of goes hand in hand, because that move from California changed a lot of my friend relationships too, and changed my thoughts about my relationships with other people. So my New Year's resolution, and I know this is kind of like off the beaten path, but was to be more cognizant of my connections and focus my time and my energy on the people that are important and are really aligned to me and the path that I'm on, and then spend less time with the people that just aren't, you know. And it's been really interesting because the friends that I could have kind of like predicted would stay around did, you know?
Yeah.
So I think it's been good. I feel like pulled. I don't feel pulled in multiple directions anymore. I feel like very focused and feel like my relationships are better and deeper and more meaningful.
Yeah. And how has that been? Because I know you used to know a lot of people. I don't know if you probably still know those people, but you used to have I remember going to a lot of your different gatherings and meeting so many different, I always felt like I always met new people every time I hung out with you. And then kind of limiting that down to what your New Year's resolution is, which is, you know, spending more time on people that you have those deeper connections with. How has that been? Sort of like reducing that number of people down to maybe like a select few.
It's less stressful for sure. I feel less pressure because I always honor my commitments. And if someone invites me to something, you know, and I accept, I'll definitely go. I'm not going to be the person that cancels last minute or doesn't show up or says they're going to come and they don't. So it's been a lot less stressful and less pressure. And now I only do things that I want to do and only go places that I want to go in the time that I want to do it, you know. My dad gave me some really good advice years ago. I was dating this guy, and he sent me a plane ticket to come out and visit him because he lived in another state, and I didn't really want to go. And I was telling my dad, I was like, oh, yeah, I'm packing. I'm going to go, you know, on this trip. I don't really want to go, though. And he said, Jennifer, you're an adult. Don't go if you don't want to go. And I was like, oh, shit. He's right. I am an adult. I don't have to go if I don't want to.
Yeah.
So... It's funny. Even though it's so simple, right? It was such great advice, and it really resonated at the time. Yeah. And I ended up canceling my trip, which was something really unusual for me. But, you know, saying no and learning those boundaries and like setting those boundaries and being firm.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting how we have like a lot of these unconscious behaviors. I find myself into those too, where it's like maybe that comes down to my like people pleasing type of tendencies, where you automatically feel obligated that if somebody presents an opportunity to you that you need to do it in order to make them happy. And that has been a lot of my learning, especially in 2021, which is, you know, learning that those boundaries, that my needs matter, and that it's okay to say no to something that you don't feel entirely invested in doing. You know, and that's a difficult thing for somebody like me because of the sort of upbringing that we've been so, I guess, programmed to accommodate, which is wanting to make sure that everybody's okay, even at the cost of my own happiness or my own needs. But one thing that I learned, of course, in 2021 is that my needs matter and what I want matters. And if I don't want to fucking do it, then I shouldn't have to do it. Nothing against them, but self-care is something that I think needs to be observed. You know, this New Year's was really interesting. And I remember around only 11:30 p.m., that evening, having this thought in my mind, which is like, why everybody goes through this sort of interesting, intimate, and sensitive. They access this intimate and sensitive space within themselves a little bit before it hits midnight on New Year's, where everybody just starts maybe all collectively looking up into the sky or looking at their loved ones with this depth that you don't normally see throughout the year, where this like vulnerability comes. Like why there's something about New Year's where everybody collectively has the same conversation, which is you're remembering who you were in 2021 because you know that with the advent of 2022, it's going to become a new opportunity to be someone entirely new. But in order to experience that 2022, you have to almost let go. You feel like you're letting go of something that you'd grasped onto so hard. You know, so it's like this collective thing that happens that's really, really beautiful, where we're all letting go of a year together. And that involves us going into introspection and thinking about all the things that we have to be grateful for, but all the things that we're also letting go of. You know, another thing that I learned as far as what I talked about accepting change is I learned a lot about, and this may sound somewhat trivial, but, you know, accepting change through my cat's health issues. You know, it
Oh,
reminds me of like
yeah.
Buddha when he was venturing outside of the city walls. And Buddha had never ever seen anything other than royalty his entire life. He ends up going outside and he ends up seeing an old man, just this like rickety, sort of like fragile old man walking across the way. And that scared the shit out of him, but also surprised him too, because he'd never seen that before. Right. And because he was able to see that old man, he was faced with his own mortality. He started asking those questions like, well, what is life if it's not permanent? And the inevitability of change came into Buddha's field once we saw this old man. And he started becoming more interested in the truth of how everything works. And my cat was a perfect example of that. This animal that and this could apply to anybody that has an animal or anybody that they have in their life. You just automatically assume that they're always going to be in your life in some way. You know, my cat's been in my life for over 10 years. And this may sound trivial to people that don't have animals, but if you've spent enough time with your animal, believe me, you will think of it as a fucking person. And so this idea that like this animal, because my cat had survived death twice in 2021, and I was able to witness her dying, but also witnessing her surviving that and living, that helped me face also my own mortality, but also really, really was an unbelievable lesson of how things in life aren't permanent and change is inevitable, you know?
Yeah.
So that was like a really, really, really difficult time. But it's stuff like that. When we're faced with real life shit, somebody passing away or an animal passing away, it breaks us out of this sort of egoic state that we end up finding ourselves in, and places us in this field of like sincerity. You be really, really honest with yourself when you're faced with losing somebody else. You know, and another part of this change was accepting the current spiritual landscape. This is a really, really important one, Jen. Accepting the current spiritual landscape, right? I had this conversation with somebody a little while ago. In 2012, 2013, we're obviously not talking about 2021, but I'm talking about the new age spiritual landscape leading up to today is very different. Back during those times, you had leaders, Marianne Williamson, Eckhart Tolle, Neil Donald Walsh. Like you had a lot of these prolific leaders that were sort of manning the ship with this whole spiritual thing. And that was a beautiful thing. I'm noticing that we don't have that so much now, right? And there was this thought that came from my ego in the midst of this whole global pandemic thing, which is like, you know, we need a leader. We need a leader like Alan Watts. You know, we need a leader like Osho. Like, what is the leader for our time that we're currently in that is going to push our sort of spiritual community forward? Because with so much despair happening in the world, you know, even both spiritually and politically, there's just so much craziness going on. There's just this, I'm hearing my ego come out and say like, you know, we need a leader that can help us navigate through this process. Because when you go online, you know, you see where the spiritual community has gone through social media, through our interactions with other people in the space. And to be quite honest, it's not a direction that I had ever anticipated it going, because you have a lot of ego that is being placed into the fabric of what used to be, or what seemed to be, a more sacred type of thing, you know? So you have spiritual narcissism, you have spiritual bypassing, and these are things that are taking the bulk of the attention, especially on social media. So I had this thought come in, like, where's the leader? And I started thinking to myself, well, we're in a period of change where we don't need a leader. Maybe that is the acceptance of change that I needed to come to, is that we're at sort of like this period of understanding with spirituality now where we don't even need a guru anymore. All of the lessons that we need to learn are available to us online, through books, through other people. And I had to put my ego in check, because I realized that like that whole era of guru-student relationships is over. It's completely over, right? Because we have all of the tools in order to, you know, become radically independent with our spirituality. Of course, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't create community. But when my ego comes in and says, you know, where's the Marianne Williamsons at? Where are the Alan Wattses at? And I had to like check myself and realize, you know what? All of us are those people. You know,
Yep, they're
all
out
of
there.
us.
All you have to do is a simple Google search or start looking on YouTube. I mean, there's thousands of people that are out there spreading, you know, spiritual goodness.
spiritual goodness. And you have to,
we're all leaders. There's so many leaders in this space now.
and you have to navigate through what resonates with you and what doesn't,
Right.
And that's one thing that I had to learn, which is like, you can go online and you can find a lot of stuff that doesn't fit within that sort of like spiritual box that you're in, and a lot of stuff that does. And I don't want to put spirituality into a box, but I'm just talking about, weeding through the sort of trivialized fast food version of spirituality. And this may come across as a bit judgmental, and I don't mean it to be a bit judgmental, but the truth is there are a lot of, whenever you place a radical independence into the realm of spirituality, you're going to have a lot of ego inevitably make its way into that whole thing. And you need to work through that. And you need to find what resonates and what doesn't. And so that has been a really big practice for me, which is, accepting my own spirituality and accepting myself as my own, student and teacher relationship, and letting go of this sort of idea that there needs to be a leader,
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, it's interesting that you say that. I've here lately, the last couple months, I've been really into YouTube tarot card readers. There's so many. Oh my God, there's so many of them, and so many really good ones too. And they all say the same thing. They all start their videos with this is a general read for the sign of Aquarius. Take what resonates, leave what doesn't. And it's funny. They all say the same thing, and it's also true. I feel like, you're still divinely guided to hear some message if you're being brought to that specific video by that specific person at that time, that there's a message in there for you.
Yeah. And you'll know if ego's there or there isn't. If you're being honest and sincere about your practice, you'll know when someone's just blowing smoke out their ass. You know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
And you'll know what resonates with you. So,
yeah.
What are the ones you got, Jen?
Yeah. So this one is, this one really kind of hit home with me because I've made a lot of changes this year too. And it's more gratitude and not taking things for granted. And the basic needs in life that I took for granted before, like having gainful employment and housing and transportation. A lot of those, I was in transition with a lot of those aspects this year, right? Changed jobs, took a job for significantly less money. When I changed jobs, I lost my car. So for the last 6 months, I haven't had a car, and with the chip shortage, it's been incredibly hard to purchase a car because everything is so expensive. Even used cars are like the price of new cars now. So, yeah, just in living in LA and moving to a different destination, like just through COVID and seeing all the restaurants that closed down and small businesses that will never reopen, and all of the tents set up, people homeless, unhoused, on the streets everywhere. Numbers that I could have never fathomed or imagined that I would ever see. So, yeah, just seeing that kind of stuff and seeing how real it is really puts it into perspective how, I don't want to say lucky, but how grateful we should be for everything that we have in our life.
Yeah, I love that. It's like even the simple things, right? There are so many like luxuries that we had before prior to the pandemic where it was so easy to overlook the simple things in life that we would normally take for granted. And once those sort of more trivial things were taken away from us, say you're somebody that liked to go to clubs and party, you're always out at festivals, you didn't really spend a lot of time at home or even with time with people that you actually really cared about. And the pandemic sort of like forced us into this position of being alone with ourselves more, with people that matter. And like you said, like there's a realness and a rawness to it that creates this contrast that's so unbelievably huge and so unbelievably different than what we were used to. And so the simple things become a lot more, I find myself appreciating them as so much more because you see all of this despair out there. You see people dying of a virus. You see the sort of socio and economic, issues that are out there in the world. And so you start thinking back at your life and being so grateful for even the little things that you have. And I think this is the reason why the last few podcasts I've been really, really treading into what I would consider like Zen Buddhism, which is like becoming more conscious and aware of the simple things and realizing how much power and how much beauty is in recognizing those simple things that we tend to take for granted. Now, when I wake up in the morning, I feel so grateful that I have a place to live, that I have the ability to eat, that I have, family, animals, that I have a sanctuary and a space to call my own, because there's so many people out there that don't have that.
Yeah, that's so true. Yeah, just basic necessities. And I actually split that into two, right? Like being grateful for super basic necessities, and then also being grateful for the small pleasures in life, right? And that's something that we talked about on another podcast, like when you wake up and have your coffee or tea in the morning, and just like really being present with that and enjoying that time of transition as you wake up, and the aromas and the flavors of the tea or coffee, and just like really being present with that. So that was a separate number on my list, but certainly two things.
And it's like
two major things that
it makes me think of like there's the difference between aloneness and being lonely, right? The lonely is just sort of like this feeling of missing out. It's like that ultimate FOMO. But then there's this other thing that Osho likes to talk about, which is aloneness. Aloneness, which is like resting within, the comfort of your own beingness, which is being completely content with just being alone, being comfortable with who you are, And I think the pandemic has sort of like influenced that in me, where you were sort of forced to spend more time with yourself. And because everybody kind of collectively was going through the same thing, I'm noticing this is how this impacted you too, Jen, which is like your relationships become more meaningful in the face of something so intense like a pandemic, because no longer are you having maybe superficial conversations about this or that. Now you're all in the same playing field. You all have the same sort of threat of potentially being hurt by this thing that's going around. So there's this honesty and this sincerity that you hear in people's voices. Like, we can no longer pretend anymore,
Right.
So there's this feeling of like, okay, well, let's be real, because we're in a situation that really, really calls for us to really, really be real and stop fucking around and stop pretending. So I'm noticing that my relationships became a lot more meaningful because we're all going through this together,
Yeah, it's funny looking on social media and with acquaintances of mine that I just like knew through other people, and looking at the activities that they're participating in, and what they're doing now, it further divided the gap between my interest in having continuing a relationship with those people, right? That's like I just was able to see on the outside that I was like no longer aligned with that person, and it was totally okay to never talk to them again. And I feel totally fine with that decision, where, maybe last year or the year before I would have felt, like, oh no, I need to be friends with everyone. I need to maintain all these relationships. And I just don't feel the desire to do that.
Yeah. It seems like the contrasts that are happening in life are so much stronger and so much more apparent, talking about like the polarities between sort of light and shadow. And things seem to be so unbelievably divided right now in so many different ways. And not that you have to pick a side, but the fact that you can see these polarities both happening in such a stark contrast to each other, it allows you to, if you're practicing awareness, to see both of those things working and deciding not to participate or interact with them. And I think that we would call that sort of like awareness. And that was one of my things that I had learned, which is accepting the contrasts and the polarities in life. In the Tao Te Ching, which was written by Lao Tzu, and he wrote the Tao Te Ching. It's about Zen Buddhism. He talks a lot about contrasts in life, which have to be in order for life to exist, right? So, and contrast exists as a system which allows us to awaken from the polarity of opposites, right? And we're seeing that we're surrounded by that all the time. You have our political system is a perfect example. You have Democrats, you have Republicans, you have vaxxers, you have anti-vaxxers, you have good, you have evil. There are so many different things pointing to these stark contrasts and polarities that are happening in the world, and they are so unbelievably apparent that makes it one of the most potent lessons that you can learn when practicing awareness, because you're able to see both sides without engaging, without getting lost in this sort of, you either choose one or the other. And you'll also be able to overcome this feeling of judgment, this feeling of feeling obligated to participate, because I feel like it's in exploring these polarities that we have the opportunity to awaken to God and the meaning behind life. And Zen is all about this sort of art of non-doing. And the way that we get to this process of being present in awareness is by acknowledging that there are these polarities that are happening and not participating, not even wanting to push them away, because it's so easy right now, right? There's so much polarity that it becomes easy to choose a side. It becomes so easy to start a fight with somebody else. But I think when we're practicing awareness, at least from the Zen Buddhist perspective, you're able to see all of those things. You're able to see how the ego wants to grasp a hold of these things and participate in the chaos. And instead of participating, you just observe it and you rest within your own peace and realize that these things that are happening are not you. They're not fundamentally you, because they're not.
Yeah.
Their basis is not love,
Yeah. Yeah.
The one thing I noticed too is because this whole thing, we're talking about being alone and you spending a lot more time alone, how important it became to create a sacred space in our homes, because we spend so much time there now. And maybe that is the reason why I became so fascinated with plants, because I fucking love having plants in my home. And a large part of it has to do with me wanting to spend more time, liking spending more time at home surrounded by a fucking forest of plants. And it feels good.
I love plants. Yeah, it does. I feel like my allergies are better with all these plants around too.
Really?
Just the air feels cleaner. Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, spending more time in a space that feels good, which is, investing into your own sacred space, because obviously we spend a lot more time there, But yeah, a big lesson for me has been accepting the contrasts and polarities in life. Basically just change it, just not trying to participate, not trying to get so engaged and wrapped up in the drama, and just accepting that these things need to exist for you and I both to awaken to spirit. Mm-hmm. They have to. How else are you going to do it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what other things you got, Jen?
All right. This one is about living with less. I feel like in 2021, I lived with a lot less than I had before. Mm-hmm. Less money, less relationships, less traveling, less everything. And I really liked it, There's something to be said about keeping your backpack light and, being nimble and that kind of, I don't want to say that I live minimalist, because I don't, but living with significantly less and being actually happier.
Pretty soon you're going to end up buying a Sprinter van, Jen, and you're going to take to the van life. You're going to be a photographer taking pictures of mountains and shit.
Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't know that I'll ever get there, but I've thought a lot about whenever I lived in a small apartment, right? And how cozy that felt and how easy it was to keep clean, and how I had so much extra money to travel and to go to school and learn and do other things, where I just felt like I didn't really need that much, And now I'm kind of circling back to that, because as you get older, I think that the pressures of society and the pressures that you put on yourself and the expectations that you put on yourself, like, oh, I'm 40, I should, have the white picket fence and 2.5 children and be married and have a house, Yeah. I feel less inclined to have all those things and to kind of to mold myself into what society wants me to be or thinks I should be.
Yeah.
Like being a mother, I've never really had a desire to have children. Not saying that having children is bad, or it's just not for me. And I feel okay with that, and I feel okay with the shame that other people, like other women specifically, will kind of shame you if you don't have children, and kind of treat you like you don't understand what it is to love until you have a child, which I'm sure there's a lot of truth to that. And I know that we, as women, are put here to procreate. I get that. But I don't think it's for everyone. And I think it's okay to admit that if that's not for you.
It's okay.
So it's kind of like 2 in 1. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Once you get into that whole spiritual thing, you start to notice that those are all just projections. Those other people projecting what they feel is the best thing for the life in which they live. But you just assume because it's what works for them that it'll work for somebody else, you know. And I try to think of like what percentage of this has to do with how we grew up. Our parents teach us what they know about life. And we assume when we're young that they know what's going on. And then we approach a certain age when maybe we're in your 30s or your 40s where you're at the emotional and mental capacity of your parents and you realize like, hey, they don't really know as much as you think, you know. But as a child, it's common for us to stereotype ourselves into, let's just say, groups. You know, we do this as adults. We want to fit in, you know, see where we belong. So we go into what I was talking about before, the polarities of life. We go and explore pleasure, we explore pain, we explore goodness, we explore sorrow, until one day we see through the illusion of all of it and realize that we don't belong specifically to any one of these things. When we choose a side, at least from my experience, we tend to isolate ourselves from the opposing side. You know, what I'm talking about is just engaging in sort of like a polarity, something that causes us to create division between other people. I think for me, I realized is that I don't belong in any specific place because I feel like from the spiritual perspective, we belong everywhere. And I think that we needed to go down this path of trying to fit in to all these different things, to trying to make all these different other people happy. We needed to go through all of that in order to realize that we didn't need any of it. You know, and I think that's what the spiritual path is realizing that in order to awaken to self, we needed to play this game for a while. We needed to go through this process of not remembering who we are or pretending that we didn't know who we are until one day we woke up and realized that all of this was a game and that we were taking it too seriously. And we needed to go through all of it in order to be able to give it all up. You know what I mean? And I think because once we give it all up, that's when you get everything back. That's when you receive, you know, the beauty and that sort of spiritual realm becomes available to you, is when you're not so involved in the division and the polarity of life. Now you're just accepting all of it as part of like the game, as part of like the whole drama. And that's what makes it easier to step away from it and just remain true to what you want, you know?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And the things that you have in your life don't define who you are. You know, it's about your experiences, your relationships. Everything else is just things, right?
Yeah.
And I actually have done a lot of decluttering as far as like the way that I decorate and the way that my house looks. Everything, every piece of furniture, every photo, every knickknack, every plant, every single thing that you have in your home stores energy. And it really does affect you and affect your the energy that is flowing through your home, like the chi that's coming through your front door and flowing through your home. So I've gotten rid of a lot of things that were just things, you know. I was like, I don't need this. And got rid of it. And surprisingly, my house feels much more peaceful, like more of like church-like.
And that's like a really, really good example of what we're talking about here is you're okay with letting those things go because you're no longer identified to those things.
Right.
Right? Mm-hmm. You're going from a very specific focus of to almost like a more universal sense of self, that like you're no longer identified with objects because you are now becoming the subject. You know, like you were completely content with just being within, you know, the piece of your own being. You're no longer projecting your consciousness outwards and saying like, okay, I need these things in order to be whole. And I've gone through that too, where it's like you just assume you need all these things because everybody around you has all this shit. But then you realize once you have those things, it doesn't make you any happier or any more whole. And then once I let go of those things, I'm not talking about being like an ascetic living in the mountains or something, but there's a modest amount of like, there's a moderate amount of things that you need in order to survive and actually to be happy, and it definitely isn't. We can get by with a lot less than we think, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot less.
Yeah.
Significantly less, actually.
Feels good.
So, yeah.
It's like a big, really good example of how you're sort of like cleaning through your own spiritual house too, because it's like you're creating open space. And I imagine that's because you are creating that space inside of your mind too. It's no longer cluttered with things because your mind isn't cluttered with things.
Absolutely. And here's a little sidebar feng shui tip for anybody that's interested in the new year. Is a good way to get the good chi flowing through your home is to declutter your entryway. So if you have like maybe a table there that kind of catches your keys and change and shoes and all that stuff, clean that out. Clean it out, remove it so there's nothing in your entryway. And then also sweep your front porch, put some plants out there, make it nice, and inviting. And that will, it's an auspicious way to invite good chi into your home.
Oh,
because the good chi flows through your front door.
That's such a perfect word to use, Jen. Auspicious.
Auspicious.
I love that.
Yeah. Even painting your front door red, because red is an auspicious color too.
Oh, I like that too. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. That's a good tip. I'm going to go a little deep here, Jen. This is a little deep sauce, because this one is really, really important to me. And this comes from my own sort of like spiritual archive that I want to explore here for a moment. One thing that I definitely learned, I've continued to learn, but something that kind of became a lot more apparent in 2021, which is understanding God as an experience and not as a concept. Right?
I like that one.
And the one thing that I'm realizing as I go deeper into my own spiritual practice is the more I experience God through action, the less I feel compelled to communicate about God through words. Right? Because I'm starting to notice and really existentially feel God as an experience. And I was thinking about this the other day. It's like, why is it that we have such a difficult time trying to explain or define love or define God? Right? We can try our best, but even the greatest explanations of God or love don't seem to quite get at it. Right? It reminds me of this sort of Zen quote, which is, the finger pointing to the moon still isn't the moon. We can come close, but we can never, ever define clearly what God or love is. And that's because we're leaving the burden of responsibility on our ego to explain something that can only be experienced through action, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a really powerful sort of teaching, at least for me, because the more I realize that I can't define God through words, the less inclined I feel to spend all of my time trying to explain the feeling. And what ends up happening is I end up finding myself more absorbed in the present moment, right? More absorbed with what I'm doing. And I feel less compelled to find the words to explain what it is that I'm feeling in terms of God, right? So I'm understanding God through myself, how I love others, realizing that I'm not separate from everything, that I'm a part of everything, right? And realizing that you cannot conceptualize an experience of God while having the experience of God, right? Because in order to define God, we must split ourselves into two. There has to be an experiencer and that which is experienced. And there has to be a subject and object relationship. And you cannot define an experience in which you are actually part of, that you are the subject. You can only experience it. Otherwise, it becomes intellectual. So what I'm trying to say is that you can't accurately explain God while you yourself are having the experience of God. You can only experience it. You can only actively experience love through your associations with other people. You can only actively experience God through your associations with other people. And if you find yourself trying to define God, automatically it places you into the realm of ego, because you are approaching it from the vantage point that you are separate from that, and you aren't separate from that. So anytime I feel like we end up posing the question, automatically that should show you that you're coming from ego. The only thing that you can do is just be that. The only thing that you can do is just be God. The second we identify that we are enlightened, the ego wants to identify that enlightenment as its own, right? And so enlightenment becomes another sort of egoic endeavor, right? So the best thing that you can do is to just be that experience and not get too intellectually involved in trying to identify what enlightenment is. Because the second you do that, the ego wants to personify and make it its own. So the best thing that you can do is just be love and fully immerse yourself in the experience of doing something really simple like making a fucking cup of tea or loving somebody, you know? I hope that made sense.
Yeah. Yeah. To sum it all up, it's like, you don't need to talk about it, just be about it.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. See, I'm over here making it all complicated, but you know what? You summed it up perfectly, Jen. God is not a concept. It is an experience.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. All right. So we're getting close to time, but so I'm going to just shift through this and kind of go down to the end of my list and talk about one that I think is really important, right? And it is the importance of being tech savvy. And I know this sounds kind of lame.
What?
But
I didn't see that
I
one
was
coming.
never really a super tech savvy person. But 2020 and 2021 really forced me to be more tech savvy and learn how to operate a bunch of things. I mean, you know me. Anytime I'm trying to set up for the podcast, everything's going wrong. You have to go through all my settings and help me set everything up. But
is this thing on?
Is this thing on? Well, why isn't this working? I'm calling you on the phone. Like, my screen's black. I don't know what's going on.
Your microphone's missing, Jen. You're talking into your hand.
Exactly. You're like, well, did you plug it in? So
you're supposed to wear your headphones on your ears, Jen.
Yeah. So it's the importance of being tech savvy. And now everything I do is pretty much remote. I mean, I do go to my clinics in person, but the majority of my job, I'd say like 90% of it is remote. Yeah. So, and we're really moving into, I mean, we've already been there for a while, really, with the invention of the internet and all of the internet-based businesses, and shopping has moved to the internet, and brick and mortar stores are going away. Just all of those things. I mean, we're transitioning into such a digital age where everything is going to be digital. There's digital real estate now.
Oh yeah.
There's
NFTs,
crypto, NFTs. I mean, all of these things. This is the future, and I know people feel uncomfortable about it now, but it's not going away. So,
and those people that are like more naturalists, and they're like, no, this whole shit is fucking the apocalypse is gonna, like, this sort of to see it as a sign of the times. But I'm like, you know what? If all is God, and to really, really sit with the fact that there is nothing that happens in life that isn't moderated by God. There has to be some trajectory. There has to be some reason why we're going through these things. And if ultimately ends up with us blowing ourselves up, then hey, that's what's supposed to happen in the Kali Yuga sort of period of time.
Right.
And that doesn't seem too detrimental of a thing if you're somebody that believes in reincarnation like me. It's like, okay, we can come back and do this a million times. But the fact that it even exists, to me, shows that there's got to be a reason why God wants us to go through this path, you know? So I kind of move with the punches. I'm not one of those people that's like, no, all this technology is bullshit. You know, of course, practice everything in moderation. I'm more about balance, you know, but
yeah.
I see that it's going in that direction. You have all these different, you know, cryptocurrency, NFTs, all these things that weren't in the picture at all in the early 2000s. I mean, they weren't a part of my life back then. Now they are. We've just had to adjust.
Yeah. Absolutely. And that's a direction we're headed. And you can resist if you want, but you're going to get left behind. So yeah, just the importance of being more open-minded and kind of going with the flow and the transition of where we're all headed.
It's a crazy thing to think, right? Like you literally are almost forced to have a smartphone. You have one. You have to have one.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
And it has to be up to date. I mean, you can't even have an iPhone 6 anymore because they don't make updates for them anymore. So it like forces you to stay up to date and to get the newest phone and the newest technology. Yeah. So
there was something that I listened to. It was a snippet. It was a clip from the Joe Rogan podcast, and I can't remember who it is that he was talking to, but they were talking about like Apple deliberately created this sort of process where once they come out with the new phone, that something happens with the old phones to where they start operating so much slower, and you're almost forced to upgrade. Yeah. Like they stop developing the software for it, or maybe the speed from which the new technology has to go, the old phones can't go. So that's like you have to constantly be up to date with their technology.
You do. That's a real thing. That is not just a rumor.
Like, oh, so
I know because I just got a new phone and I had an iPhone 8 and that was already happening.
really
they
just
weren't
like
making
all of a
updates
sudden
for the
slows
iPhone 8
down.
anymore. Mm-hmm. And it would be really glitchy and it would only work like 50% of the time. I mean, it was also old, so there was that too. But so I had to cave and get a new phone.
Yeah. Well, here's to
It was
becoming
hard
more.
giving up that middle button, but now I'm happy I did.
Here's to becoming more tech savvy, Jen.
Yeah.
I think that's a good skill to have, especially if we're doing a podcast too, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Agreed.
other things, and I'll go through mine really, really quick, which is, establishing strict boundaries, right? And that's something that I think that you kind of brought up. One of those things that I ended up learning a lot in 2021, which is the art of healthy disagreements, right?
That's a
And
good
that
one.
was one thing that I've always had difficulty with because of that sort of maybe that more shadow side of my codependent personality, or that sort of people-pleasing type of part of my personality that I've been trying to overcome from my youth, which is, taking control of my emotional well-being by not falling into these situations where I always feel like I have to agree with people. Now, I'm not one of those people that just agrees with everybody. Like when I'm having a conversation with someone and I know 100% that what they're talking about is bullshit or I don't agree with it, like I will voice my opinion. But when it comes to like my own needs, like something where I feel like there's an injustice there, it was always difficult to speak up about it. And it was also always difficult to also disagree with somebody in like a healthy way. And so I feel like this last year, I've really had to practice that, which is like holding true to my boundaries, understanding that my needs matter, being vigilant about what I will and what I won't allow in my space, and, taking control over my emotional well-being and understanding that there's absolutely nothing wrong with that.
There's nothing wrong with that. And that's a
Yeah.
really hard thing to master too. So good for you for being
You know what
cognizant
though,
and
Jen,
aware.
I'll be honest with you. I feel like you
Self-actualized.
did teach me, you did teach me a lot of that too.
Oh,
Because you can kind of be a hard ass when you need to be, you know what I mean?
you know, I'm not a hard ass. I'm just really direct.
You're what?
I am. Like I'm very direct. Like if you're,
Yeah.
and all of my girlfriends know that too. They don't come to me to complain about, their relationship problems that I've already given them advice on 100 fucking times.
Yeah.
Because they know that my advice is going to be honest and direct. I'm not going to be like, oh, girl, he's just scared. No, I'm like, he's got someone else. It's time for you to move on. He's showing you that he's not interested in you. You have to let it go.
Yeah.
So if you're looking for somebody to sugarcoat it, I'm not your guy.
Yeah.
But
And you've had to say that
Yeah.
the exact same thing to me several times last year. And that was a hard truth. That was like some tough love. And I'm just looking at it
It's
from
tough
like a
love.
highly empathetic sort of perspective. I mean, that was diametrically opposite to, how I saw things. Like you were just very direct and you were like, look, this is how it is. And I had to accept that. Or I had to, ignore that and continue making the same mistake over and over and over again. But that strength that I feel like you embody in being direct is, more to the point. And I think that's really important for somebody like me because I tend to romanticize things. I tend to over-intellectualize certain things and try and find the meaning in every little specific thing that I lose track of the big scope of something, especially when it
Big
comes to
picture.
relationships,
Yeah.
And so not overcomplicating things and just accepting something for what it is,
Yeah.
If we're really, really paying attention. The truth is there. I think this, this want and need to try and find or over-intellectualize just speaks to an avoidance of the inevitable. you
Yeah.
know?
I'd agree with that.
Yeah. So
What
I had
else
to
do you
really,
have on your list?
just learning that my needs matter, I think for a long time, my worth was determined by what others thought about me. And this isn't something that I just learned in 2021. These are ongoing practices, but there are certain situations that happen throughout life that make these lessons a lot more apparent, is learning that my needs matter and my opinion matters and what I need for myself as far as like my own practice really, really matters, and not to worry so much about what other people think about my life, what it is that I do, and understanding that people don't have to agree with me, and people don't have to believe what you believe in. As long as it feels right and true to you, and it feels right to you, then how can that be wrong?
Agreed.
And the importance of
there's a
family and
lesson-
healthy. What's that?
I think there's a lesson in not seeking validation from others in that as well. And that's something that I really struggled with too, was I always felt like I needed the approval of everyone. And that has certainly shifted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what else you got to wrap this up?
So the last one I have to wrap this up is just the importance of family and healthy relationships, which I think we kind of touched on throughout the pod, and just some of the notes that I have here, which are basically just saying, that we have a moral and spiritual obligation to cultivate the life in which we know to be true every single day, whether beautiful, magical, simple, honest, and loving. If you're somebody that sees life in a magical way, you have a moral and spiritual obligation to yourself to cultivate that every single day, And there are going to be people out there
that.
And there are people out there that are going to make you feel like that magic doesn't exist. But if it feels true to you, then it's real. And we have an obligation, we have a responsibility to continue cultivating that beautiful, magical life. There's nothing out there that is ever going to convince me that life isn't beautiful. And even though there's so many other forces out there that are trying every single day to convince you that magic doesn't exist, it does. If it
does.
is real for you. So I think surrounding yourselves with people that experience that same beauty that we experience is important,
That reminds me of I'm going to tell a quick story, and I know it's at the end, but so I just bought a car like 2 days ago, and it's been really hard, number one, to find, exactly what I was looking for within a reasonable price because of the microchip shortage and everything is so expensive. And anyway, X, Y, and Z. So I go to the dealership and I contacted them about a car that I saw online. And I showed up, and the guy that was showing me the car, we hopped into the golf cart, and he was going to drive me over because it was in a different lot. And he said, well, how was your day? I said, you know what? My day's great. And I was like, how's your day? And he said, every day is great. And I was like, you know what? Yeah. I totally fucking agree with that. And he said, every day is a choice, and you choose to make it a good day or you choose to make it a bad day. And I always choose to make it a good day. I was like, you know what? So do I. I absolutely love that. I was like, I was supposed to meet you. Like, this is manifestation at its finest, right? Like,
you're like, you know what? You're like, you know what? I will buy that car from you, sir. I will buy that car from you.
Sure will. Yeah, it was absolutely perfect because I was working another deal with a different car salesman who was like totally schmarmy and just like I just got like a bad vibe from him from the very beginning.
Yeah.
And then I actually found this other car, which was exactly what I wanted, and to buy it from a guy that I felt like really deserved the sale. So,
nice.
You start vibrating at a higher level, and you start attracting those people to you, and
that's what it's all about. That's what it's all about. You attract more bees with honey. As long as you're remaining true to the love that you have, it'll get you a lot farther most of the time. Especially when you surround yourself with people that see that sort of magic. It's unbelievable how beautiful life becomes when you share it with someone that experiences the same beauty that you experience. You can always trust that, like, when you look at a sunset and you say, man, that is a beautiful fucking sunset, that person next to you is going to see the exact same thing. They're not going to try and tell you like, oh, that doesn't look, it's all right. It's like, no. When you share life with somebody that sees the same beauty that you see, that world that you're trying to cultivate in your life becomes so much more real, It's like when you can trust that when you wake up in the morning that person is going to love you the same way that they loved you the day before is really fucking awesome feeling to have. Because
it is,
it's just reinforcing this belief and this feeling that God exists and that love exists and that magic exists. And I think surrounding yourself with people that see that is fucking awesome.
It's fucking awesome. Yeah. And the more that you see that, the more that you attract people who also see that.
Yeah.
And then it just becomes easier and easier and easier to live in that space.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you get this really weird feeling. You get this really weird feeling that you have this little pal called God sitting next to you all the time. It's interesting how when you experience love with somebody, it doesn't have to be, can be a friend or it could be a partner. It becomes unbelievably clear that God exists,
Agreed.
Yeah. So those are good ones. Those are really, really good ones, Jen. I'm glad that we were able to share some of those things. There are a lot of things, really important things. We'll get to go into 2022 with sort of a new perspective, and we'll see what the future holds for us, or we'll see what the present moment holds for us, not the future. None of this past or future shit. We're going to see what the present moment holds for you and I, and just in our lives. There's a lot of change happening, a lot of good change. Got to keep our heads in the game, be positive. Apologize, everybody, for falling off the boat for a couple weeks, but hey, you know what? The holidays are really important. We want to spend time with our families, but also wanted to make sure that we took care of ourselves while we were, well, at least I was exploring the many dynamics of being sick and recovering from that. Being born again, a new person, You know what I mean? Thank you guys. Thank you guys for tuning in to Divine Nobodies Podcast. Welcome to 2022. We appreciate all of you guys. Thank you for remaining with us, especially throughout the last couple of years. We're going to get through this new one together and experience this new world together. Who knows? The aliens might show up. They might be on their way. This may be the year it happens.
Waiting patiently.
Waiting
patiently.
patiently.
I live in Nevada in the desert.
Yeah.
Waiting.
You have to. They're going to happen. You're going to see them there. Anyways, thank you guys for tuning in. Find our episodes on YouTube as well. If you go into the description, you can find the video portion of the episodes. If you have any questions, you can reach out to us at divinenobodiespodcast@gmail.com. Please leave a like and actually a review. One thing that I heard is that Spotify does reviews now. So if you guys listen on Spotify, definitely give us a review. Let us know how we're doing. You could also do that on Apple Podcasts. And follow us on Instagram. We'll post some content on there. And until next time, friends, thank you guys all for tuning in. We'll see each other soon. Namaste.
Namaste, friends.